Hello students, I wanted to make a quick video about explicit and recursive formulas for sequences. I know that sometimes you're asked to take a sequence and write it in different forms, both explicit and recursive forms, and I wanted to talk about how to translate between the two. So the first thing I want to do is take a look at this sequence, which I know is arithmetic. It's an arithmetic sequence because I'm subtracting 2 every time. Whenever you're adding or subtracting by a constant every time, it's considered arithmetic. So I will write it as a recursive sequence first, and then, recursive formula first, and then I'll show you how to take the recursive formula and turn it into an explicit formula. So here goes. So this is the correct recursive formula. I know that's saying take the current term, and if you're trying to find that current term, you would go to the previous term and subtract 2 from it. And it's also telling us that the first term is equal to -4. So if I was given this recursive sequence, or this recursive formula, and asked to find the explicit formula, there are a couple pieces of information that I need. First piece of information, I need my a sub 1, my first term. Since I know that's -4, it goes into my explicit formula for the first term. I also would need this, which is the common difference. If I know the common difference in the first term, I can write the explicit formula just from that. So you should recall that this is the general form of an explicit formula. A sub n is equal to the first term plus n minus 1 times the common difference. What we can do is take the information that we found from the recursive formula, the common difference in the first term, and substitute them in. And that information would look like this. Notice that here I'm given the first term, and I'm also given the common difference. Now, one thing has to change here. Remember that common difference isn't -4. The common difference that we identified is -2. All right. So what I've done is I've identified a explicit formula from a recursive formula, keeping in mind that the 2 pieces of information that you have in common are the common difference and the first term. We're going to do that for this sequence, which is 19, 13, 7, 1. Looks like we're subtracting by 7 to get that next term. So I'll give you the explicit formula first, and then we'll write the recursive from it. All right, here you see a sub n is equal to 19, and 19 we considered to be the first term, plus n minus 1 times -6, and that -6 is equivalent to our common difference. Now, in order to write the recursive formula, what we need to do is keep in mind that we'll start from any term we want, let's say the a n term, and in order to get to the next term, we have to subtract 6. So I'm going to write that out as a recursive formula. All right, in the recursive formula, it tells you that the common difference is -6, and it also tells you that the first term is 19. I spoke about this in class a little bit, but I want you to bear in mind that the 2 major pieces of information for any sequence is the starting term, which in this case was 19, and the common difference, which in this case was -6. Let's take a look at explicit and recursive formulas for geometric sequences. For this geometric sequence, in order to get from 25 to 75 to 225, I'm multiplying by 3. And if you didn't believe me, you could take 75 and divide it by 25 and get 3. That's your common ratio. I'm going to give you the explicit formula, and then I'll show you how to write the recursive. All right, here in this explicit formula, oh, pardon me, I gave you the recursive formula. Here in this recursive formula, I gave you the fact that the next term is equal to the current term times 3, and I also recognize that the first term is equal to 25. Now, given this recursive formula, I'm going to ask you to write the explicit formula. And remember, you're looking for 2 things. You're looking for the common ratio, and you're looking for the first term. You should remember that this is the explicit formula for a geometric sequence. Once I have this information, I can insert my common ratio, which is 3, and my starting value, which is 25, into this formula. So here you should see that information presented pretty clearly. You can see that we have 25, which is our starting value, and you can also see that we have 3, which is our common ratio. And we got both of those pieces of information simply from the recursive formula that they gave you at the beginning. Let's take a look at the last geometric sequence, which is 3, 9, 27, 81. Now in this one, the common ratio and the starting value are the same. We're starting at 3, and we're multiplying by 3. The explicit formula is the one I want you to write. The explicit formula is the one I'm going to give you. I want you to write the recursive. Maybe I gave you a little easy question here. If I tell you that the first term is 3, and I also tell you that the common ratio is 3, there's got to be some way for you to take that information and put it into the recursive formula. Now think about recursive formula. It says, starting from any term, to get to the next term, you perform some operation. Let's say multiply by 3. Try to write that sentence out in mathematical terminology. Taking a look at the recursive sequence here, you can see that the next term is equal to the current term times 3. And you can also see that the first term is 3. Notice something very interesting about the previous exercise and this exercise. The recursive formula is really similar up until here, because the pattern is exactly the same. The only difference between this sequence and this sequence is the starting value. Starting value of 3, starting value of 25. And notice how the starting value can make the sequence change dramatically. Alright, this was a video on how to change any explicit formula to any recursive formula and back again. One suggestion that I have, if you're having difficulties changing between explicit and recursive, you might want to write out the sequence first, because it's easier to write a formula once you see the sequence. Good luck studying.